Good morning, good afternoon, and good night, wherever you're tuning in. We are Slava and Jonathan, bringing you the Side Quest podcast, where we talk about character development, stories, and all things that are world building. And we occasionally take side quests, because, frankly, that's how conversations work. Just as a reminder, this whole show is spoiler heavy. So sit back, tune in, and join us on this episode of Side Quest. Well, good morning, Slava.
Good morning, Jonathan.
How's your head? Full of ghosts?
The ghosts have left, thankfully.
How'd you get them out?
The whole night I fought, used science and alchemy, and an exorcism.
Alchemy?
Yep. Talked to a priest, woke up in the woods, howling at the moon, but the ghosts were gone.
Was he an actual priest or someone just playing a priest on TV?
You know, I never asked.
What were they wearing? Just tell me that to start.
A dark garb, a cloak.
They smell like booze. Find them in a back alley behind a liquor store.
No, they did smell like death, though. They had an interesting crescent moon-shaped dagger on them. I don't know what that was about.
Okay, well...
Wrong priest? Maybe I talked to the wrong priest.
Yeah.
I think I got the wrong priest.
Well, if he smelled like death, not sage, I'm not sure where you're at this point.
Yeah.
But, you know, your sage is going to...
But I'm all better now. I feel better.
Do you, though?
Lighter, powerful.
That's a weird word to stick in there. But all right.
Yeah.
Get back to your alchemy. Well, folks, thanks for joining us for the second part of Head Full of Ghosts, where we will be ripping this book apart because it's not great, but we'll get into that shortly. Any fun highlights from the week, Slava, in your wonderful, wacky world?
Fun highlights.
You ever do the high-low buffalo? Somebody asks you how your day is, and instead of asking how your day is, they go, what's your high, what's your low, and what's your buffalo? Buffalo is like something that sticks out.
Yeah, we've done rose, bud, thorn, which is a little different, but
yeah, similar.
It was a pretty ordinary week. Nothing stands out that is buffalo-esque.
What about alligator tail? It's more up your style.
You know, that was part of the ritual. Instead of a tail of newt, it was a tail of alligator.
Mm-hmm. Are you able to still eat it, or are you allergic to it now, where it's like your kryptonite?
You know, I haven't ate it since last night, so I don't know. We'll find out next time I eat it if I turn into a monster.
Okay. See you on the local news transformed in some way.
Yeah. Yeah, no, honestly, the week was pretty bland, which I'm not going to complain about. Just a good old few days of the office, I guess.
Nice.
What about you? What was interesting about your week?
Well, I got laid off from my tech job, so that's cool.
Yay.
Not cool, but it's where we're at. So if any of you folks out there are looking for someone for a tech marketer, preferably B2B SaaS, you just reach out in the comments and we will get a hold of me. And by we, I mean Slava will get a hold of me.
Because I control the comments.
He controls the comments on some of the platforms. But in other news, we are cooking up some fun stuff for the future of SideQuest.
That we are.
It's taken a lot of work, but we are chipping away at it. So more to come on that when we have laid the new foundation, because there's a new foundation coming.
There is.
And we're also going to try and work on getting a website up for you guys.
Yeah, I'm excited.
So there's a little more depth to seeing Slava's notes and research that he pulls together, and just more for you to interact with. So looking forward to that.
Me too. And now that you don't have a job, you can really delve into the meat of our new project.
Yeah. Where's my income going to come from? The ghost.
You should probably start looking for another job too at the same time.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, all right. Okay.
Yeah.
Got it. Well, that's good. Maybe
especially now that you have a wife, supposedly, allegedly. Nobody has met.
Allegedly. Well, you've met her on the video wackadoo, so
I did.
She's real. She might just be here trying to get me for my money. Joke's on her. I don't have any.
She's like, this guy's in tech. He makes good money. Oh. Wah
Oh,
wah.
yeah. Anyway, let's dive into this book here. But before we do, you know what time it is, you literary adventurers. Smash that subscribe button so that you never miss out on a side quest.
Indeed. So we are in the second half of Head Full of Ghosts by Paul Tremblay. We are back with the Barrett family, who have two daughters. One of them who's having a mental breakdown. And the dad, seemingly a worthless person, is convinced that she's possessed by a demon. And he takes her to church, and he takes her to a priest. Things unravel. And we are at the point where he also invites the Discovery Channel, a documentary team, to come visit them and film the exorcism. So here we are. It was told to us that it's going to be a mind-bending tale of psychological horror. As it's unleashed, and it raises vexing questions about memory, reality, science, and religion. That was from the intro of the first episode in this book, and nope, that didn't happen.
Yeah, that was a pretty big letdown,
Yeah.
honestly. Big build-up, big letdown.
Absolutely. And I mentioned this in the previous episode. What got me interested in this book was partly this project of ours, this podcast, and I Googled scariest books, top 10 scariest books. And the one that came up in like number 2 in the search list on Google was this. And it was connected to a Stephen King text, which I verified that this book scared the hell out of me. I was like, oh, I like Stephen King. And if this book scared the hell out of him, this might be a good creepy book. Then I read the synopsis of the plot, which is, I reworded it a little bit for the introduction. I just read part of it. And it was the opposite of scary or interesting or creepy. Wasn't scary as hell at all. It was banal as hell. But that's about it. And the greatest letdown is, and I'm going to say it again, I've said it before, potential here was so great. And the delivery and execution was just such a letdown.
Agreed. There was like the concepts, and we'll get into this more as the episode progresses, but the concepts of what could have taken place here or where the story could have gone are pretty vast, which was great. But the problem was the execution was half-hearted at best, and it felt like no research was done in terms of like Catholicism, which is a very beautiful religion that is very rigid in its taking on exorcism cases, which if you don't even do any research about Catholicism, you would know if you read The Exorcist. Because they don't just go, oh, you think you're possessed by a demon? Yeah, okay, we'll pop in on Thursday at 3. No big deal. It's just not a thing. They do extensive research, and they weed out all scientific method first. Thinking back, we had Zubair on, and you also talked extensively about that, where the process that the Catholic Church goes through to vet whether or not a exorcism is needed. And that should have been seen here, at least in passing, with like, oh, then they did this, then they did this. The Christian tone was less than flat. It was as if minimal research wasn't even done. It's like, well, I think this is how it works. And then they called it good.
Right.
That doesn't live up to like, I want to write an exorcist book from the viewpoint of science. It's like, okay, then do that. Don't half-ass it. Like, don't partially do it. Like, really commit to it.
Absolutely. What drives me at the wall is not that this is supposedly, or it could be seen as, a critique of Christianity or Catholicism or the default position of some Christians that, oh, must be a demon. Critique that. I'm not going to get my feathers ruffled by it. But the fact that you can't articulate your opponent's worldview and you can't articulate them in a way where a Catholic could read this, or I could read this. I'm not a Catholic, but I know enough about Catholicism and Catholic exorcism practices I could read it and go, yeah, that's how it works. Now, I've said in the previous episode that I've met people like John, like Mary and Marjorie's dad, who has said similar things. So there are Christians like that out there. And it's okay to take that type of Christian and set him in the setting that Paul Tremblay set John in. But there's nothing that provides a critique of John, of the dad, even from the Christian perspective in world. I'm talking all in world. This is not a real story. I'm talking in world critique here. There's not even a counter to John's insanity. Like the priest, or even the priest's bishop, who says, "What are you doing? You're doing what? Yo, we can't do that. No exorcism here." And then the priest, being a dum-dum, sides with John and goes rogue. Cool story. Like it. Tension, obstacles, all the stuff that you want. Each character's default position is the most banal, logical conclusion of the person that Paul has created, the character that Paul has created. Mom, has nothing but contempt for her husband, smokes and drinks. Okay. Then starts smoking the house. Dad just goes cuckoo banana town in evangelical, crazy land. Marjorie, I think I like Marjorie the best. Marjorie's the only one that actually, okay, this is what a teenager girl probably does. This is how a teenager acts. Mary, okay, maybe, but there's no exploration of any of the characters.
Yeah, and this is something that I mentioned before is, and I want to say it was last episode, is character development. We should know where the characters are going, and we should see them grow either in health or in or decay. It doesn't matter which, but the reason we read stories is to see growth. And when characters don't grow, we consider those stories inauthentic and bad stories. One of the things that stood out to me as an example of this, and not everybody does this well, so that's fine. But again, if you're going to try to hit the caliber, and the thing is, like, I'm kind of taking this guy to town, but if you're going to say that you were trying to do something at the same caliber as The Exorcist, then you need to be held to that standard. That's the first premise. The second premise is, or the second thing here is the protesters, right? They're a shelf piece, and I'll get into the main characters a little later here, but they're a shelf piece. I don't know what they want. Like, no, you're worshiping, you're making money off the devil. Okay, fine, but what do they want? What do they want?
Right, and the thing that really pissed me off is some of the protesters are apparently supposed to be the Westboro Baptist Church.
Yeah, I noticed that.
I was like, really? They came out, fine. You're the author. This is a story you're telling me. They came out. Why did they came out? To your point. What
do they want?
What do they want? What do these Westboro types in this world want with the Baird family besides them flaunting the devil on TV?
God hates this, God hates that. Okay, that's fine, but what do they want? Tell me what they want. And the thing is, I don't need a 67 chapter ordeal about this other sect of Christianity, which you didn't even really separate, because you have like the town protesters, and then you have this, pseudo Westboro Baptist church that comes in. Okay, fine, but tell me what they want. Tell me what they want. So let's continue down this road of like issues with the characters, because like Slava and I mentioned previously, we're going to be trying to do a more robust look at elements of story, and character development is a huge piece of that. So let's look at each of the characters individually here briefly, Slava.
Let's start with Mary, our supposed protagonist.
Can we, sorry, I don't mean to be bougie, but can we end with Mary? Because I have a lot to say, because she's the narrator, right? Like, let's save the steak for last. Is that fine?
All right, let's go with Mom. It's almost Mother's Day as we're recording this. So, Mama Sarah.
Yeah.
So, there's subtle changes in her behavior. Well, let's just keep with the critique that we laid out already. There are subtle changes in her behavior. They could become more pronounced, but there's these jumps between them. And although that's supposed to indicate that she's being impacted, okay, it falls flat. I don't know how else to describe it. It falls flat. She's an atheist. but acquiesces to Dad's demands to rely primarily on the church's guidance, which is not the church's guidance, which is Father Wanderley's rogue exorcism, while she retains the need for Dr. Hamilton to be in charge of Marjorie's care. Given their finance situation, she relents. And that by itself is fine. Again, this is going to be repeated ad nauseum. I hope it doesn't sound like I'm just beating a dead horse, because the more evidence we present, the stronger our case is for us saying this book is not good. She acquiesces to Dad's demand to pursue the church's exorcism, Father Wanderley's exorcism. She advocates for Hamilton, but because there's no money, she's like, all right, let's get paid. But at the same time, she's kind of aloof, and then she gets into it with that, then she's aloof again, and that's probably what happens with people faced with those kind of situations that have the character buildup of a woman like Sarah, but it just hangs there. And she seems to have no will, just contempt for her husband, a drinking problem that's built over the last couple of years. And
she smokes.
And she smokes. Yeah,
Very
right, she
important
smokes.
details.
She seems to favor Marjorie, which I suppose there's that, two sides of every coin. That's probably a good story to tell too, but it's never explored.
Right. I agree with you. If you're going to favor a child, that's fine. But why are you favoring the child? Is it that you favor firstborns because you were a firstborn? Like, it doesn't have to be, again, 67 chapters to give me a backstory. Good authors know how to do this in a sentence or two. Next book we're doing is Dynasty of Evil. Drew Karpyshyn has found a way to do this with his characters in 2 or 3 sentences. So it's possible. Do it. I want to say it's not hard, but I say that not to you and me, because I think to you and me it would be hard. We haven't done the reps to be well-versed authors. But someone who gets published like this should be able to do that. And if it's a weak point for you, which is fine, we all have weak points, then you need an editor to help you, which is also fine. Yeah, Mom over here in The Head Full of Ghosts I wrote this note down, but it applies to both Mom and Dad. The parents didn't stay the same, which should mean character growth. But somehow they felt like they became even less than caricatures, because they're the same 3 things that I ranted about last episode of she hates God, she has contempt for her husband, she smokes. And it's gotten worse. And then she's got this line to make us think that she's like been enlightened, where I don't know what that other woman was thinking when she agreed to this. What? What? Like, okay, yeah, I understand you're in duress, but like, you're trying to wane philosophical.
Yeah, it's pseudo-profundity.
Pseudo-profundity, right. And we don't get enough time with her for that to be an authentic statement. And so you're just like, man, this is going to be really harsh, but I feel like a 6-year-old is trying to make me a really great French dish. Slava, say a French dish. Quick.
Escargot.
I thought that was just like in a thing. You just like weevil it out from a jar.
Well, you can, but if you can make escargot, like homemade escargot or fresh escargot. So, but even if you take it from a jar, if you take the snails from a jar, you have to drain them, you have to prep them, and there's a way to cook them that's a 6-year-old wouldn't be able to do.
That was not as fun of a moment as I thought.
Steak and frites.
That's better. That's better. Or I was thinking like something like ratatouille. Like something very ornate to make, right? That's right. French, right? Ratatouille?
Sure.
You got to shave all the vegetables. You have to cook each one differently. Then you put them together. Like, it's ornate. It takes time. You have to spend time with it. And it doesn't feel like the story was given the time that it needs. The book, frankly, should have been 3 times the length.
Right. And I want to add something to that. That line by itself, the pseudo-profundity thing, could have been, again, poor execution. Could have been fine if we were told somehow that this is a line the mom uses to manipulate the daughter. That she's being manipulative, that she's being somehow abusive or trying to be coy for the sake of diverting attention. But tell me that. Explain that in the story, not just drop a line like that there and be like, because that's the reaction you get is this. And we're not the only 2 that are hating on this book just because we're hating on this book for no other reason than we have nothing better to do. I had our friend Jess read it. She hated it from chapter 2 and trudged through it just because she's going to be a guest on the next episode, part 3, when we do a recap. She had the same complaints. Things felt out of place. Things weren't explored well. Things weren't built well. Character growth was missing. She had the same complaints before I even told her what I felt about it, or told her that you and I both didn't like it. I just said, here, read this. Let me know what you think. And from the get-go, she was like, this book sucks. Why are you making me do this?
Yeah, because we enjoy doing podcasts. That's why.
Right.
So let's take a quick pause. Drop in the comments. Did you read this book? Yes or no? Did you like this book? Are we off base? Look, I'll hear you out. Tell me why I'm wrong. I don't mind. Tell me why Slava's wrong. I'll probably agree with you.
Yep.
Let's move on to the father. I want to talk about this real quick.
Yeah, the dad. The dad is, well, he's unlikable, and he tries to embody the traditional responsibilities of being head of household, even screaming in the middle of a marriage retreat that he is the head of household.
Mm-hmm.
And I think if you have to scream that, you're not fulfilling that role. He still hasn't gotten over his job that he got fired from, but it was the job that he took directly out of high school. He works at a toy factory, worked at a toy factory. When the novel begins, he's been unemployed for 18 months. He exasperates his wife. He hasn't been able to find any gainful work. Can't even cut lawns or anything. So I'm assuming he wants to be a director of the next toy factory, and he thinks that that's the way to go about fixing his situation. I'm assuming.
We don't know. Yeah, we're not given enough information. To your, I want to pause real quick and that that comment. If you have to yell that you are something you're not. There's a line that I always think back to when I see moments like this in stories, and it's Game of Thrones. Joffrey says, "I am the king. I'm the king," and then his uncle is like, "Any man who must say I am the king is no king, is no true king."
Right.
It's like, right, if you got to tell me that you demand authority and respect and whatever, then you're not you're not that person. Because you haven't earned it. We see the same childish attitude from Elokar in Way of Kings.
Right.
I'm the king. I'm the king. No one respects me. Well, have you done anything respectable? So anyway, I don't want to derail us on Stormlight here, but it's the same premise where if you have to tell people you're something, then you're not that. Anyway, keep going.
Yeah, for sure. And to your point about screaming, his parenting style is intimidation and screaming. And he has deteriorated in the months leading up to the story and in the months covered during the story. He keeps deteriorating into this shell of a character that just is angry and despondent all the time. And that's it. That's all we get from him. He's a lapsed Catholic. Instead of using the church as a support system, an added thing to Marjorie's treatments, an additional treatment, if you will, he goes behind his wife's back. Which in that case, I can understand, whatever she is, atheist or not, her being annoyed. Take her to the doctor.
Yeah.
And then involve the priest. Don't just take her to the priest because all of a sudden you realized, oh yeah, God does exist and maybe the church can help me. And that's the problem. Again, going back to my original comments, it's not that millions of Catholics and evangelicals suffer from this problem and act this way. It's that it's just dropped there as a stereotype in this book, and it really doesn't add to the story. It doesn't give us a well-rounded explanation of how it's impacting the family. Of course, it would impact the family, and it probably would impact them in the way that Tremblay has described it, but it's not well developed. He's just a sucky person for the sake of being a sucky person.
Right. So we have this story of a husband and father who's a lazy man who can't even get a job. Show me he has the residuals of workplace trauma. Show me
Right.
that. Don't tell me that he can't get a job and then move past it. Like, is he lazy? Is he angry at his last place? Is he fearful? Like, what does he want? This gets back to character development. The character development in this book is absolute garbage. I don't know what the characters want, and I don't know where they're going, and I don't see them grow healthy or in decay. So they don't grow, and we're going to do Dynasty of Evil next, and this is something that you and I've started talking about, is Bane doesn't grow. And you pushed back on me on this last episode, and I parried your blow, if you will. No, if a character doesn't grow, then it's not character development. It doesn't have to be healthy growth. That's not what I'm saying. I don't need every character for sunshine and rainbows and everyone's Cinderella. No, some characters have it really terrible, like whatever his name is from Survivor. Like, his life's just shit the whole time. Like, he doesn't ever get a break. But I saw him grow. And that's what we want when we encounter stories, is we want character growth. And you don't have that here. You have this husband who's lazy, who can't get a job, and suddenly he's poisoning his family out of nowhere. So he's finally taking action because he just needs to kill his whole family? What? It comes out of nowhere. You don't hint at it. You don't hint at in any way that he dabbles in these things. Like, make it believable. And I mean, we know at the end, like, it's Marjorie puppet mastering this thing, but like
Orchestrating,
that's the word that I wanted. Thank you. It's like Marjorie's telling her sister Mary, oh, Dad left out poison in the basement, he's got a shrine down there, blah, blah, blah. Why didn't she look? Why didn't she go look? I don't have any fear of her going to the basement outside of a couple sentences here and there throughout the book where she's like, oh, the basement's kind of scary. But then she's down there at one point with her sister.
And if you give the father a menial job, if you use that as a catalyst for him deteriorating, okay, that makes sense. He is at his wit's end. He can't get a job. He's waiting tables. Or show him, just like I said about the mom, show the manipulation the mom is executing on her daughters. Show the dad's lack of self-awareness in that each job he looks for, he goes far above his expertise just because he thinks he's a hot shit and he's not. Do something in the story, write something in that shows me how he deteriorates to the point where he's like, well, the only way out is to kill us all and go to Jesus. And then we'll all be happy together, bouncing from cloud to cloud with cherubs singing around us. Show me that deterioration. Show me him going that route. But he's just there, petulant and obnoxious in the way he parents.
Yeah.
That's the dad.
Yeah.
Lazy and petulant.
It's like each of these characters that's not Marjorie or Mary, because I feel like at least those two get a little more play. Everyone else is a cardboard cutout. Everybody. The protesters, the priest, the doctor, the director, the writer. Like, and can we just talk about for a second, and then we'll get to Marjorie. The film crew feels like an additional gimmick that pulls away from the author's self-described goal in writing the book. Like,
yeah,
this
I'll buy
doesn't
that.
add.
Yeah.
This doesn't add to the story at all. And if it does, please tell me in the comments why this adds to the story, because I don't see it, and I consider myself to be an average, intelligent human being. And if I can't figure it out, then it's probably not clear enough.
And then you have, I don't know what to do with this piece of information. He threatens to sue the church and the production company. He sees himself entirely without blame for the situation.
Yeah, he's a victim.
He gets violent with the protesters, and then he becomes pen pals with one of the protesters.
Yeah.
What the hell is going on? What is that?
That's pretty obnoxious. Like, I'm fine with him attacking the protesters because he wants to defend his daughter, but frankly, I don't see you really enjoying your daughter at all.
Right.
So
it's all about him.
I don't know if I believe this. You certainly don't like being bottled up in contempt, but like the shell of masculinity that is described in this book from his character placement And then the contrast of what Mary talks about in her blog as Karen, she's got this line in here like the cabal of men that were in my house. Like, get out
Ugh.
of here. What are you talking about? Like, you're like a pseudo feminist because you're 8 and you don't know anything about the world. And this is your dad, and we don't have any information about why. Did he touch you when you were little? Did he bring you to church and you cried? And like, give me reasons. It doesn't have to be he left you on the side of the road for 15 minutes once when he went in for a pack of cigarettes. I don't know. Give me a couple reasons why you don't like your father.
Or why you're wary of men.
Yeah.
Give me reasons why you should have fear of men. Not just because your dad yelled at you and that's it. Father Wonderly was a little strange, but then you had a great relationship with a guy from the production crew who was kind of like an uncle or a big brother to you.
Right.
So the cabal of who? Like, if Paul wrote that every single man in Mary's life was somehow bad to her or abused her, and that happens sometimes where it
does.
A cascading effect, which an abused person finds him or herself abused by the opposite sex as a youngster and continues to find relationships with the opposite sex, whether they're sexual, intimate, platonic, they're all somehow abusive because that's just familiar to you and you're too blind to understand what you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that I get. But yeah, that Karen Brissett, Mary's blog, Gagville. Dude, so grating and obnoxious. And this is what I said about one of Sanderson's books, Lift.
Yeah,
where Edge Dancer, where I'm all for a bratty little kid being bratty.
Precocious teens.
Yeah, all that stuff. That's great. I like sarcastic characters. I think they're fun. Writing in a character who's a little bit bristly and unlikable is perfectly fine. But if it's grating to the point of obnoxiousness, or if it's obnoxious to the point of grating, I lost interest in Lift. Couldn't care.
Yeah, you've disengaged. Right.
Same thing here. Why is Karen/Mary such an obnoxious twit on her blog? Because Mary with Rachel is different. Is this some form of catharsis? Okay, I'll buy it. Not explained. Not set up correctly.
That's a thought that I had where we find out that Mary killed her family, right? Okay. Which is a fine twist. Like, that was like, oh, okay. All right. Like, the avenue that it came about, I don't buy, but the incident itself, like the plot point, I'm in for, right?
Yeah.
And there's a distinction here. The plot point of like, Mary is convinced by her sister to kill her family. Like when you're writing your outline, like, oh, that's a twist. That's kind of fun. I like that.
That's a good twist.
Right. But the problem is, like, make that the big reveal and then go back, and I say this about authors that I really don't like. Not authors. That's not fair. Because I don't dislike China Mayville. I dislike his book. So let me just correct myself for a second. Tremblay, like, go back and do 3 rewrites where you're building up to this moment where the reveal is that Mary tells this publicist, I killed my family. And it like rushes back to her. And then we go, oh, those moments, they make sense. Okay, yeah. But like that wasn't given there. And then it's just like, it feels all cobbled together like a 6-year-old's trying to make ratatouille. Like,
right. And fine, give me the blog and make Mary's alter ego super critical of everything that went on in that house. And make the blog, make the blog posts breadcrumbs to where you're like, how does the blogger know all this intimate information?
Right.
And then you're like, holy crap, only the murderer would know this or that, so it's not the dad.
Right.
Who the hell killed the family?
Yeah. And this is and here's the thing, and I hope that the audience hears this, is we're not just ragging on the book to rag on the book. We're saying there are a number of options that could have strengthened this piece, that would have made the characters authentic, would have shown that they have growth. And even using the story devices, like having a blog, which I hated because you only showed it 3 times. And that's not enough for me as the reader to grasp that this is how you want to tell the story. And the thing is, I'm gonna reference Survivor again. You can tell the story however you want, where you said that all the page numbers starts from 310 and it counts down to 1, where the big climax. Okay, great. Do something different. I'm fine with that. But do it well. Do it well.
Absolutely. And the last thing I want to say about Dad is He's very zealous, despite having any understanding of Catholicism,
Or
which is
being a
mostly,
lazy schmuck.
or maybe lazy schmuck. Maybe he doesn't understand anything about Catholicism because he's a lazy schmuck. And hey, this is a critique that I will lob at fellow Christians all day long. They are poorly versed in the history of the church, in the church's teachings. Most of what they get is cobbled together from Google or the TED Talk they hear for 20 minutes on Sunday.
Ooh, woof. Okay.
That is bookshelved with some Coldplay concerts. That's it. That is it. That is horrible. And you ask your average Christian to explain to you any doctrine or dogma, they'll just slow blink at you. And that's Dad. That's John Barrett.
Right. It's a caricature almost, basically.
Right, exactly. And that's my point, where that's the only thing we get of him is he's this guy who's lazy, who doesn't understand anything about religion, who doesn't understand anything about his family, who doesn't understand his wife. Even if she's completely unreasonable, there's nothing that shows him trying to deal with her.
Or
And
show
then-
me that he has a hobby or two, like to
Right.
let off steam. He puts
Right.
together tiny boats in glass bottles.
Right.
Oh, I can't believe she did that tonight. We got to get this sail up here. Give me something. Show me he's a person.
Right. And in dealing with her and failing, that's another catalyst for his going into madness.
Sure.
That is a good plot device. You tried with your wife, you failed. And irrespective of her being reasonable or unreasonable, just show me that. You failed at somehow winning her over to your side, and then I must kill her. I'll buy that.
Yeah. Show me a little more transition here.
Yep. The obstacles are not
Believable.
believable.
Well, also they're not there. They're not there. There are no obstacles. He just shows us the outcome of the characters. Oh, hey, now he kills his family.
Yeah, okay.
Well, what was the obstacle? The obstacle wasn't you getting your daughter better because there's a gap in time. So, what's the obstacle? And I'm realizing that as we're talking about it, it's like, I don't
Yeah.
know what the obstacles are, which is not good. As a reader, I should know what the obstacles are.
Yeah. Yeah, now that I'm thinking about it, the obstacles that are supposedly there, they're not well defined. Well, let's just give it to Tremblay. They're there, but they're not well crafted. They're not well defined. They're not well articulated. And some of the conclusions that you see, you can go, like, I'll guess that was the thing that made him do that. And the rest of it is just a conclusion without anything preceding it. Like, why did he take her to Wanderley and not to the doctor? Is it just because he's a dum-dum who wants to stick it to his wife or prove to his wife that the church can help his stupid atheist wife that annoys him? Or is it because he did it on a whim? Or is it because he has been broken at this point and he's like, F it all, we're doing it my way or we're doing it the church's way? Or is Wanderley somehow manipulated him into doing this? We're not given enough to understand his wants, needs, and actions.
I agree. I think the father's a schlub. Tremblay doesn't do a good job at displaying the walls that these characters need to overcome. And you and I have been going through this other book because we both want to write $1 Million Outlines, and the author talks about the fact that if your character succeeds the first time, it's not interesting. If they fail 15 times, it's not, you lose your audience. And so the kind of the best statistical, I guess, is the word that I want to use, rundown of this is having them fail about 3 or 4 times and then succeed. But the thing is, you're showing them fail and slam their heads against this wall of whatever their problem is. But we don't see that. And the thing is, we don't see that with the main character either. So, now granted, main character is an 8-year-old girl, so what could she really do? And again, we're getting to that. I want to detour it, though, and wrap up with Marjorie first and then get to Mary at the end.
Yeah, for sure. And something I think that's worth noting, because it's connected to Dad's actions in the book, Mary declares to Rachel that she never believed that her sister was possessed, in contrast to her dad, who latches on to the demonic possession as a way to explain his daughter's symptoms, and it's the only way to fix it, exorcism.
Yeah.
So I think Tremblay is trying to connect mental illness to the supernatural as a critique of supposedly Christians like John Barrett. I found this online. In an interview on YouTube, Tremblay suggests that despite being a horror fan, he believes that demonic possession is a way of perceiving mental illness through religious lens. So he betrays, in this interview, he betrays his worldview, which is fine. I'm not knocking him for believing that. But if that's what you want to talk about in your book, if you want to show how religious zealots, specifically religious zealots who understand very little about the religion they're zealous about, can interfere with a person's mental illness or the cure, for lack of a better term, of a mental illness, dealing with a mental illness can be detrimental if you insert religion either at all or in a way that is just ass backwards. If that was his point with Dad, that's the questions he wanted to raise, the points he wants to make by making Dad the character that he made him. Well, pass, fail, grade, fail.
Yeah.
But anyway, Marjorie.
Not great. Let's talk about Marjorie. Right.
Marjorie. I think Marjorie is the only likable character. She's the only one that I'm sort of rooting for. And out of the rest of the main characters, she has a better developed character, which is not saying a lot. But I think she's the best developed character in the book.
Okay.
Because you do have her as a 14-year-old teenager. You have her being annoyed at her little sister. You have her being snarky and sarcastic. You have her being a little despondent. You have the teenager angst. You kind of feel for her during the exorcism, and it seems like an episode where her mind is literally breaking, or she's having some sort of episode that is brought upon by her mental illness or the demon, whatever it is. So you have her in these moments where you're like, yeah, this is a believable 14-year-old. But then we don't get enough of her struggle with the mental illness, as you've said. And granted, we're seeing this through Mary's eyes, and Mary, as we was established in the first episode on this book, is an unreliable narrator.
Mm-hmm.
But there should be some sort of thing, there should be some sort of event in this story, or a series of events, where we get Mary's perspective, because that's the only perspective we get, who's unreliable, and then Karen Brissett, who's also Mary. There should be somewhere interspersed through all that, those breadcrumbs that I mentioned where you're like, okay, Mary's saying this, but as she describes what Marjorie's doing, it's not exactly as Mary perceives it. And through those events, you get a fuller understanding of what Marjorie's going through. I find her character interesting. She could have been even like a central figure in the family, because she ends up manipulating Mary into murdering her family, presses Dad's buttons. She does this performance act in front of the Discovery Channel crew. All that could have been fattened up to give us a more rounded character, a more evil character, or a more broken character. Pick the route you want to go with Marjorie. What are your thoughts? I've talked at length about each one. Give me a little bit more about Marjorie.
So this story takes place during a time that the internet exists. And Marjorie casually repeats demon names, before and kind of during the exorcism. And it's like, okay, and then the thing that we hinge on that makes this real is that she couldn't have memorized all those things. Really? That's the hinge that we're going to put this on? What if she has a photogenic memory? Then what? Seriously, then what? She couldn't memorize all these things. That's what it hinges on. That helps the priest and then the doctor who's associated with the Catholic Church. And it's just like, this teenager could memorize those things, and that's one thing that frustrates me about Marjorie's character, is that they don't give her credit of being able to just have very normal responses because the internet exists, and they don't discount that in any way. And they don't check the laptop. They don't monitor what she searches. And then also, like, what is Mary just doesn't know the internet exists? She's never used it before, except that at the end of the book, Marjorie's showing her the internet and going, oh, this father killed her family, his family, this father killed his family, this father killed his family. It's like, so Mary knows about the internet. This could have helped either as a tool to build toward the plot and the characters, or it could have dissuaded. And it just wasn't. It was a gray area. So that's a little bit of my dismay with like how Marjorie's treated as a character. And then she doesn't feel real to me because like this feels like a reverse on an anime. And I'll explain what I mean. In animes, precocious teens end up becoming heroes and heroines who save the world. Okay? And they outdo adults and they outdo people and whatever. So Marjorie outdoes the long-standing tradition of the Catholic Church to vet exorcisms by memorizing some stuff on the internet, and then she's consistent enough with it that they believe her, and she never breaks character.
Right. Yeah.
That seems obnoxious.
Yes. And another thing that just jumped out at me as you were making the point you were making is each character doesn't ever catch a break. And that goes back to the $1 Million Outline, where if nothing but problems and obstacles that are never overcome, if that's part of your book, that's it, that's all you're doing, it doesn't seem believable. Because in the worst situations, and I want to say one thing as my evidence, in the worst situations, there's always a silver lining. There's always somebody overcoming something. Marjorie jumps off the godforsaken banister in her house, so the state gets involved. Does the state help her? Nobody in the state thinks, what the hell is going on in this house?
Yeah.
Why is this family malnourished? Why is the mom an alcoholic? The dad's losing his godforsaken mind. And the teenage girl, who supposedly has a mental illness, who has a medical record, tries to commit suicide, and the state's like, yeah, everything's fine. We're good. Good to go. Carry on.
I want to challenge your and $1 Million Outlines note about like if a character only ever has bad things happen, it's not a great story. Because what you're saying there is that my article that I wrote about Crime and Punishment is accurate because all that happens to Raskolnikov, and you can correct me on the name, I don't remember how to say it, but
Raskolnikov.
Yes, thank you. All that happens to him is negative things. And so $1 Million Outline and you have now just validated that my article saying that Crime and Punishment is the worst book ever is true. Thank you for that. I really appreciate that.
Well, no. Head Full of Ghosts is the worst book ever, followed by City in the City, followed by Crime and Punishment. But I want to counter that.
All right.
I want to counter that is Raskolnikov has
he never catches a break.
Well, at the end he does, because he supposedly grows. He transcends certain things and goes, okay, now I understand that
but
all my problems.
End. The whole, I mean, it's a long book. It's Tolstoy. It's a long, or sorry, it's Dostoevsky. Yeah, you knew what I meant. I correct myself as
freaking Russians.
Yeah, they're all the same.
The T and the D sound the same.
That's what I told my wife.
Well played. Yeah, Raskolnikov doesn't have shiny moments in his life. We get the worst of the events in his life. But my defense of Dostoevsky doing that and why it doesn't work here, and it's a failure here, but not a failure for Dostoevsky, is he shows the slow deterioration of Raskolnikov. He shows him in moments in his life where bad things are happening and him reacting poorly to each event and how he's spiraling out of control. And then in the end, he comes to a conclusion that is, let's call it true. He realizes the truth. And that's
a moment
fine.
of enlightenment.
A moment of enlightenment. And that's fine. Yeah. What I think $1 Million Outline is saying, and what I was saying, is there is nothing that is redeemable in this book.
Yeah.
Everything that happens to each character is bad.
Yeah,
and always
I'm
bad.
I'm just bringing up a cheeky example.
No, and that's
I,
fine. That's cool. And I know to some in the audience I might be splitting hairs, but I don't think I am. Think abstractly, think in categories. Different genres, different time periods, different authors, different cultures, different the impetus, the different impetus for writing each book, right? Different reasons for writing the book. Different stories are being told, different philosophical questions are being discussed and are attempted to be answered. And Dostoevsky, hate him or love him, I think doesn't fail in what he was trying to do.
No. He does a good job.
Tremblay fails
Also true.
because not one character has anything ever good happen to them. Even Rachel is stuck with Mary, and it's kind of like, what the hell is going on?
Well, you could say that the good thing that happened was that the film crew came in and they got money, but the problem is you don't emphasize the problem enough before that happens to then give the release afterward.
Yeah,
exactly. And this is another problem with the poor writing that's like gray. It's gray area writing because I agree with you. It's a great premise. The plot twist at the end of Mary killing her family. That's a great plot point. It's the execution that I have an issue with. It's the lack of character development. Anyway, one final note on Marjorie before we move to Mary is I'm insulted for all demons everywhere, just as a side note, because Mary's just casually rattling off demon names, and the priest is like, oh, this means that she's really possessed because she knows all these names. I feel like that's an insult to demons everywhere. She can memorize information, and so like she's suddenly possessed by us. Like she would be she would be blessed or cursed. She would be cursed by us if we would, as like a positive thing.
Right, in the best way possible, she'd be cursed.
She'd be cursed to have us invest her, or whatever you want to call it. Come on, man. You're not even giving the perspective of the spiritual realm, regardless of your religion or perspective, the level of not awe, respect, fear. I guess the like the fear that's respect fear, right? Like the level of fear that it deserves, because it's like, look, if there's a spiritual realm and we're just going to build a real short case and there are spirits there who have power that's greater than ours, you probably don't want to mess with them or like insult them in this type of way. I'm not saying that Tremblay did that with his book, but like within the world, right?
Yeah.
So come on. And then my final point of like, he wanted to make a book about the exorcism from a scientific point of view. Why are you not exploring Marjorie dealing with voices if you want to look at the science side of this? That seems really important.
And that goes back to the execution part, because we can discuss this and we can even surmise and with some confidence saying, oh, this is what Tremblay wanted to do. And then we can go to the internet and look at interviews and oh, yeah, that's what Tremblay was trying to do, but falls short. But good old Meredith, or Mary, as we know her, is, well, she's kind of obnoxious as a character. And more obnoxious than she needs to be for an 8-year-old.
So I don't disagree with you, but why? What evidence do you have to validate that point of view?
Well, she always talks. When she's 23 or when she's 8, she just talks nonstop. She seems to have selective memory.
I'm going to give her the selective memory, though, because she was 8 and she had a traumatic upbringing. Like, that one you got to give her. You got to give her that one.
I guess I'm assigning malice where I don't have evidence for malice, although by the end it's kind of validated, right? But if you're just reading the book before the reveal that she was manipulated into killing her family, it seems like the selective memory, she selects to have selective memory. That's what makes her obnoxious. She's always prattling on beyond the scope of 8-year-olds prattling on. I don't have kids myself, but I've been around plenty of kids because all my friends have kids, and I've seen kids act out. I've seen kids be obnoxious and prattle on and not know when to shut the hell up because they're kids, and that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
But in world, it seems a little bit out of place. And to your point, absolutely, an 8-year-old going through the stuff that Mary's going through, she'll have to find some kind of outlet to deal with it. And maybe her obnoxiousness and her need for attention is because she doesn't get the attention she needs from dad and mom. I get that.
Mm-hmm.
But if Tremblay is trying to tell me that this is Mary, she's 8 years old, this is Mary at 23, she hasn't grown because of the abuse she experienced and the complete, cannonball to the chest realization that she was manipulated by her older sister, who she loved, to killing her family. That's a hell of a thing to carry.
Yeah.
But it seems almost trite in the way it's explained. It's kind of like, oh, yeah, here's a confused little girl and angry 23-year-old woman, and she killed her family. And religion sometimes poisons the well.
I want to ask you to elaborate on this a little more, preferably with evidence if you can remember it. The first thing I want to point out is like, okay, you call her an unreliable narrator. Like, point those moments out to me in the book. They don't have to, I don't need all of them, but like a few of them that are really key. That's the first question. And then the second question is like, how would you have made her story better? Like, what would you have emphasized to make her a stronger main character? Again, regardless of where she grows, of positive or negative, let's just leave the plot points alone and she gets worse. How do you emphasize that with the story that took place? Those are my two questions.
The unreliable character part is not just me pulling that out of thin air or even coming to that conclusion.
Sure.
As you know, I do some research on the books that we discuss, and I read critiques, and I read praises, and I read what you would call maybe Cliff Notes type of blogs. Specifically, give them a shout out because they've helped with a lot of the plot summaries and background information for a few of our books is Super Summary. And they're pretty much for teachers or college students or even high school students. And it gives you, here's what the book is about. Here's the themes discussed. Here's the symbols and motifs. Here are important quotes. Here's the background information. And here's a summary of each chapter and an analysis of the chapter. And so that I got from them. With the research they've done leads them to say Mary's supposed to be. They're saying Tremblay specifically wrote Mary to be the quintessential unreliable character. She has selective memory. She seems to curate how she shares and what she shares with Rachel, and she frequently excuses herself from any blame for any inconsistencies in her memory. So it seems like she is building a narrative because she knows more than she's telling Rachel, and we know that because of what Karen Brissett writes on her blog, which is Mary. That's my evidence for why I believe she is an unreliable narrator.
Okay.
What was the other question?
Before I move to the other question, I, again, want to emphasize, I don't think that that's clear enough. We don't have enough contrast, and this, I think, would be where I'd make the blog part happen more often, and I would step out of the past narrative back to the present a few more times, probably. What's $1 Million Outline say? Like every 4 chapters or something like that, you need to come back to a character. If you go beyond 4 chapters and I haven't come back to present day, or you spend less than a chapter in present day and then go back to the past, I forget as the reader that this is happening. And so I don't think that there's a strong enough contrast between her blog, so her is 23 and then her is 8, to emphasize that she's an unreliable narrator. I think if you study the book the way that you're bringing this evidence forward from the summary people, which, look, I don't disagree that she's an unreliable narrator. I just don't think it's clear enough. And that's why I was asking for evidence, not just for me, but for the audience as well, because we want to move towards adding in more educational elements to our critiques of how these books could be stronger. And so I wanted you to justify your position.
Right. Well, there's even in-world stuff. Mary believes herself to be the protagonist of the story, even though I think it should be Marjorie. Right? Even if it's told from Mary's perspective, Mary regularly refers to Rachel's work and calling it our book. I think she's under the impression that she's the focal point of Rachel's work, where it should be just the family or Marjorie specifically.
Sure.
And as the novel progresses, and I don't have the page numbers for this, but as the story progresses, even Rachel loses trust in Mary's version of events. And she is uncertain how to proceed by the end of the book. She's like, I don't know what we're doing, Mary. I'm paraphrasing. Like, I don't know where this is going.
I know that ending part you're talking about where she's like, well, that's not how it reads in the emails, and that's not the story that I got from so-and-so.
Right.
Which is good. But show me that earlier in Mary regaling Rachel with the information. Like, again, the execution of the idea was excellent. The idea is a 15 out of 10. It's a really great idea.
Dude, totally.
Even the plot points, a 12 out of 10. Like, they were really good plot points in some incidences. Not all of them, but a handful of them. It's the execution of tying them together that is my issue, right?
Mhm.
So anyway, that's the unreliable narrator. Let's finish to the second half of that question. And as a reminder to the audience, I'm asking Slava to, if he was Tremblay, how would you go back? Pretend this is a draft and not the final version. How would you go back to revise, to emphasize Mary being the main character, keep the plot points the same? Like, what would you fix or emphasize or remove or add? And it doesn't have to be everything, but I just want to know, like, how would you make this a stronger piece to get closer, if not exceed, the book that he was trying to compare to, which was The Exorcist?
I would take the dials on some of the stuff, like Mary being selfish and obnoxious. I would tone it down to a more believable level, not just for a regular 8-year-old, but for an abused, traumatized 8-year-old. I would tone that
For
down.
sure.
What I would turn up to 12 is the specific incidents in the book with Rachel and the clues we get just by the way Mary speaks to her being selfish and immature in maybe inner thoughts or how she acts towards people. But the whole yappity yap yap, can't stop talking and making stupid jokes, and then the blog where she's obnoxiously obnoxious for no reason at all, tone those down, because you could write as a 23-year-old outspoken feminist who has been hurt by men, which we've already said hasn't been really covered or introduced well. I would make those more mature. So she's not somebody who's just this character who hasn't grown at all, who's at 23, the same as she's 18. I would make her character arc more dark. So as she grows into the 23-year-old, yes, she's still an 8-year-old stuck in that 23-year-old's body. Yes, she's obstinate and immature and all that stuff and obnoxious, but she has now honed her skills of manipulation. What has happened to her has made her into a more evil character. So she wants to be the protagonist of the story. Show me more of her manipulation of Rachel. Show me Rachel coming to some sort of epic conclusion, let's call it that, or some sort of dark conclusion going like, holy crap, Mary is unhinged. And have Rachel confront her in the same way that she did. I think that would add more depth, more meat on the bone to the story. Without those things, in my humble but correct opinion, we have a repeat of mom, dad, two-dimensional cutouts who are actually just caricatures. That happened with mom, that happened with dad, and each one looks a little different. And that's sort of what's happening with Mary. We get more time with Mary, past and present, and her alter ego, Karen Brissett. So we feel like we maybe know Mary more, but at the end of the day, not really. We just get, three sides of the same caricature.
Right. I think what you have spelled out is pretty close to what I would do. The only addition that I can think of that I would like to add is I want individual chapters of Rachel leaving Mary after they have their meetings and then looking through her notes and piecing together her book and having interviews with the state or the priest or the whoever and really piecing together that and emphasize Mary's an unreliable narrator. That's part of it. And then the other part is I want the reveal at the end where Mary kills her family and it to be something that both Rachel discovers, Mary discovers, and the audience discovers at the same time, to be hidden throughout. But also when you go back and look, you can see the snippets of, oh yeah, when Mary did this. And also give Mary a minor redemption from how untrustworthy she's built up to be throughout the book. So like emphasize the unreliable narrator throughout the book until the end plot point, and then redeem her a little bit where it's like, oh, your sister did this. Oh, hey, I didn't tell you about this, because sometimes we tell stories and we go, oh, actually, there's like this like super important piece of context that I didn't tell you earlier in the story, and have Mary do one of those moments, right? Like you're telling me a story about your week and you go, oh, you know what? Actually, that story I told you about, whatever, I forgot to tell you like this piece of information. And like, oh my God, like I can't believe it. Yeah, that's a huge piece of the information of the story. And da-da-da. And like Mary's, she'll feel real, and it might feel a little cheeky. But if you were to emphasize that she's an unreliable narrator throughout the story, you give me a single chapter, we'll say fifth chapter is from Rachel's perspective. So there's only going to be maybe 5 or 6 of these to show me her building this narrative, this book. One's an interview with the state, one's an interview with the priest, one's her looking at the paperwork and emails she has, and then her thinking through from her perspective, like, oh, Mary said this, but the details say this. And then we've gotten a look through Mary's perspective when she's telling the story of what happened actually as a more objective third party. Let us see the layers. That would have made this such a strong piece.
So you're saying you'd have added perspectives, not just Mary's, but you'd have added a couple of point of views.
Primarily Rachel's. And then like expand, okay, the priest gets to have a voice in a single chapter, not just the narrative that Mary tells. Okay, the state gets to have a single perspective, not just the couple sentences here and there. And frankly, interview the aunt, right? Like she's talked about, and Mary goes to stay with her briefly. And this is one of my complaints about the book as well. Did the family, like, let's just pretend that they only have an aunt. All the other family's dead, which I just don't believe, but we'll just run with it because it's the only person that we're introduced to. The aunt doesn't say, hey, maybe let me take one of the girls. Hey, let me, help you guys out a little bit. Like, we don't know anything about the aunt. We don't think she's selfish. We don't think she's evil. We don't think she's good. Oh, it's convenient that Mary can go stay with her for a couple days.
Yeah.
That's it. And it's just like, really? If you're the family member, even if your family's totally dysfunctional, you're going to go, hey, I feel like I should be involved a little bit in this. Like, I let me just take Mary. Let me just take Mary off your hands. She can come live with me for a bit.
Right. As you're exercising Marjorie, maybe Mary shouldn't be in the same house. Or maybe Mom and Mary can leave and Dad and Wanderley can go nuts.
Right.
Which would be even a darker story to tell, because then the poor Marjorie is stuck with a cabal of men who are...
Sure. Yeah, emphasize that point. I don't care.
Who don't have her best interest in heart.
Yeah. There are things that could have been done. So, anyway. Okay. Now, I know we're coming to the end of the episode, but there's just 2 more points that I really want to hit on that just stood out to me. Like, okay, so you got the aunt. I complained about that. Why doesn't the mother just get a divorce? We don't know what year this is, but the internet exists, so it has to be past 2000. Why doesn't the mom just say, this is a deadbeat dad, I'm going to get a divorce and take the kids? That's a real option here. And this is, I think, and I was realizing this as I was jotting my notes down before the episode, I think that this is my complaint with the plot and the characters meshing together, and my complaints with it, is that each character has too many options remaining for themselves. None of them are against a wall. Because when characters are put against a wall, we agree with the justification of their choices. But they're not. The mother could have got a divorce. The children could have been sent off to the aunt's house so the parents could fight it out. There are so many things. It's not like the mother was raised in a religious home, far as we know, and so she's anti-divorce, or she believes from a psychological perspective that the girls would be better raised in a 2-person household, which is a statistic that's real. There's no justification why she didn't just go get a divorce. Use the state as a weapon to try to get her kids away from this terrible man. Literally anything. But none of these characters were put up against a wall. They were just living in this gray area of a story. And this is my biggest complaint. None of them are against a wall. I mean, Mary kind of is because she's 8, right? She doesn't get any choices. So fine, she gets a pass on this one. But Marjorie's a teenager. She could have run away. If your parents are this bad, run away.
What you bring up would have been a great obstacle or a great catalyst, I get to use that word again, for Dad's insanity. If Mom got the state involved and a divorce was imminent, I'm going to have to kill my family to keep them together.
Honestly, that would have been a stronger book. Dark, which I'm fine with.
Yeah.
But a stronger book.
That's why when I Googled horror stories and I fell upon this book, I was looking for a dark story because I want to incorporate those into our podcast. We have fantasy, we have sci-fi, we have the speculative stuff, we have weird fiction. but I want a diverse set of genres for us to discuss. And I'm like, I like horror. You like fantasy. Well, let's start with those.
Yep.
Anyway, I digress. So the point of us reading this book was I was looking for a dark story. I wanted to be creeped out, and none of that happened.
As a way to bring this ship to harbor, did Stephen King explain why he thought this was the scariest book he'd ever read?
I couldn't find anything.
Or do you think they paid him?
I don't think so. And I only base this on what I've seen of Stephen King, his public persona. And I've seen him in different situations, different contexts. National television plugging his books, interviews with libraries, interviews with other authors, panel discussions, his speeches or lectures at Library of Congress. He seems anti that kind of nonsense. I'm sure he'll take money to promote something that he believes in, but he wouldn't be a shill for something that
A
he
sellout?
thinks is garbage. He wouldn't be a sellout. Who the hell knows his heart? But what I know of him, because I've consumed so much of his public appearances in different contexts, like I said, I don't think so. I think truly he likes the book because of the same reasons that I wanted to read the book and the same reasons we like the possibilities, right? So the plot, where it could go, what potential this book has, I think King likes, and maybe he read it and he has the same complaints as us, but as a fellow author, he's like, yeah,
Sure.
this is a B plus, and I really liked how creepy Mary was and the fact that she killed the family. I liked that. This was scary for me. Now, listen, I read a crap ton of Stephen King books, and he's the king of horror. None of them scared me. I wasn't terrified reading them. I thought there were good stories, and I thought there were dark stories, but they didn't scare me. The only book that truly gave me the creeps, and not in any sense where I had to put it down or I was scared, but the only book in the horror genre that I read that was truly creepy for me was The Exorcist. Every other book, even those that I've enjoyed immensely, like It and Salem's Lot and countless other short stories in the collection Nightmares and Dreamscapes, they were scary, they were eerie, they were creepy, but they didn't really scare me. I just enjoyed them for their dark element. So who knows why King said that? I couldn't find any follow-up to his tweet, but I did find the tweet. I went to Stephen King's verified Twitter account, now known as X, and that was a verified tweet.
Fair enough. All right. Well, what did you guys think of this book? Drop some notes in the comments. Let us know what you thought. Next episode, can't wait for this because I'm sure it's going to be a wild time. Jess will be on to regale us with her thoughts on Head Full of Ghosts, her likes and dislikes. And let's flip the script here for a second. What are your two favorite elements of this book? Since we spent, the last segment of this, well, we spent the whole segment of this episode telling the audience the things that we would change to make the book better. What stood out that you did enjoy? Two things.
The ending. I love the ending. I like a twist. So the ending is really cool. And when I read it the first time, I thought, okay, I didn't like this book, but the ending made it more worthwhile. And then I read it with a more critical eye the second time, and hence all the complaints about it. The ending stood out to me is really cool. And I think the POV, the fact that we get the little girl's perspective, I think that's a cool element. Again, the complaints still stand, but the fact that Paul Tremblay decided to use an unreliable narrator to tell the story, who ends up being the bad guy, quote unquote, kind of, right? Who ends up being part of the twist, the major twist, let's put it that way. Yeah. I thought those two things were great. What about you? What few things stood out to you?
Well, I guess I should have gone first because then you'd be taking my answer and me not taking yours. But I like that there was an external character, because with The Exorcist, you're following the mother and daughter, right? You're following Riley and her mom, and you get an outside-looking Reagan Riley. It's an R name. I was close enough. You are following from the outside looking in what's going on. You're also following the priest who's, not believing, which, give me a scientist who thinks that maybe he's religious, right? Like,
ooh.
You know, there's things.
Yeah.
All right, sorry, I'm not fulfilling the question.
It's okay, Jason.
Yeah. I like that there's an outside perspective of the family looking in and saying, "Hey, this is how it was for me." I like that. And to your point, and I mentioned this before, I really like the plot point at the end where she kills the family. Like, that's unique. Like, oh, okay. All right, respect for that part. Okay? Respect. As to not go back to my critiques, those are my two answers. Those are my two answers.
Well, and again, I want to emphasize something, not because we need to defend our negative stance, but in a world where everybody just shits on each other and there's so much vitriol, I watched a good number of interviews by Paul Tremblay and by his talks at libraries. He seems like a cool dude, and if by some chance, cosmic chance, Paul listens to us shitting on his book, it's nothing about him as a person.
It's just the story. Yep.
Yeah, just a story that has so much potential. Such a great freaking story that could have been executed 1,000 times better, I think.
Honestly, I'd like him to write it again. So, like,
Yeah.
Sanderson has his Way of Kings Prime and Dragonsteel Prime, and these are basically, like, his first drafts of the novel that he wanted to write, and they're completely different books. So he's released them as, like, hey, this didn't make the cut, and people are like, oh, I wonder if I can find, like, clues in here. He's like, nah, the story's changed too much. But you can look at, like, an earlier draft of the book that I, like, was trying to write, and you can see the similarities of the new book, because people get better as authors. So,
For sure.
you know, I'm sure Tremblay has gotten better as an author as he's continued in his career. Like, there's no question. The fact that you continue writing means that you're going to get better, period. Like,
yeah, and he has like 4 or 5 books, I think, under his belt, and they're all, if not bestsellers, they've sold well. So, props to him.
Good job.
Okay, I think that brings us to the end of the episode. I want to thank you guys for joining us on today's SideQuest. I'm going to ask you to take 2 seconds and rate us on the platforms that you listen to. And if you feel inclined, make sure to share with a friend.
Until next time, salty something or other that I say.
Eat pasta. It's good for you. Unless it's laced with cyanide, then don't eat the pasta. And stay away from blogs. Keep it to yourself.
We're going to start a blog, though.
That's the joke.
Okay. Well, see you next time.